Cripple Chronicles, a podcast about ilizarov frames, amputation, and the journey to accepting and embracing disability. My name is Becca. I am your friendly neighbourhood cripple and host, and we have already covered so far the accident, what happened, getting the first frame, being home, and being told that I was going to be able to have it removed. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Today I'm going to dive into the removal process, what it was like being in a private hospital versus the NHS, being sued, and some very hard decisions like if I was going to get that second frame or if I was going to amputate my leg. And if you are watching on YouTube and you watch on YouTube, this is the third episode, and you will realise today that I have not got any lashes on because I feel like I might end up crying because this is a lot. I actually wanted to also say I'm trying to keep the intros a bit shorter. However, I did think it was good to mention that I keep dropping the socials and to follow and the emails. If you're listening and you're wondering, like, this is episode 3 and you haven't said anything about what you've actually got from those, if you've like sent me something in, I'm actually recording like some episodes before I am going live with the podcast, just to kind of combat my brain and that kind of pressure that I put on myself. So I'm thinking if I've got a few ready to go, I'm all good. So that's why I've not actually mentioned anything. However, that then brings me on to, if you would like to follow me on Instagram or TikTok, it is Cripple Chronicles Pod. If you want to watch on YouTube, it is also Cripple Chronicles Pod. And if there is any experiences you would like to share about disability in general, it doesn't just have to be about ilizarov frames or amputation, anything you just want to tell me or you feel compelled to write, comment on a YouTube video or email it to me at cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Let's get into it. So, I think in the last episode we left off from me being told that my frame was able to be removed, however it would be 40 odd weeks, double the time that I had already had the frame on for. So I had made the decision to go privately, and usually when I was having appointments at the hospital, which wasn't very often, I was travelling by patient transport. But because this wasn't NHS, that meant I couldn't get patient transport for a private appointment. So that was a bit of an issue because the taxis round about the area that I lived, they didn't really do wheelchair taxis, and any wheelchair taxis that they did have were too small for me to get in with my leg extended. So we looked at options of getting like a private ambulance, which wasn't a viable option. I think for the one day, just it was like £500, and it was like £500 total, but it was like wild money for transport. But thankfully managed to find a taxi driver who took me up for my pre-assessment the day I was getting the surgery, and then also came and picked me back up, which was really good. Going to the pre-assessment was really weird. The private hospital that I was going to was directly across the road from the hospital that I had got my job as a staff nurse in, and the road that we took was the road that I had taken those first 2 weeks when I was going to work. And it was really sad for me because it was within eyeshot, and I didn't know if or when I would ever be back on the ward floor as a nurse again. after I got told that the frame could be removed and I was going to the pre-assessment and the date for removal was getting closer, I swear it just felt as if it was getting more and more uncomfortable. And I know that was in my brain. I don't actually think it was getting more uncomfortable, but I thought it was. And I just wanted it off. So on surgery day, which was the 13th of July 2020, I was picked up by the lovely taxi driver and taken to the private hospital. And when I got there, like sitting, waiting, it felt like I was waiting at a hotel reception, not a hospital reception. And we get taken up to the ward. Like, other than having a private room and a nice kind of telly, it didn't really feel much different, to be honest, than an NHS hospital. My surgeon came in, they did all the same paperwork that they would have done going through the NHS, and my surgeon had been very apologetic about the fact that I was having to go private. And no matter if I said, look, this is covered by insurance, like, we're not actually paying the full amount, he still really believed that because I had been seen throughout the NHS so far, that it should have been getting done under the NHS. I was all checked over, had the discussions, signed the consent forms, and then it was just a bit of a wait, really, so they could get the theatre ready and get me down. And I think this was one of the first surgeries where I kind of developed the coping mechanism of going for surgeries that I'm just going for a really nice sleep, and when I wake up, all of this is going to be better. Because of leading up to going to the hospital and thinking that my leg wasn't going to be healed, and then told it could come off, and going through the process of like private frame removal, I was feeling a lot more anxious than I had, and I really just wanted to go to sleep and wake up when it was all over and it was fixed. That was a mood for a lot of it, to be honest. I have said quite a few times that I really just wish they could have put me into a medically induced coma and I could have woke up when my bones had healed. However, one of the main things to get your bones healed and stronger is to put weight on them, so putting me into a coma really probably wouldn't have done much good. Or it would have, but it would have taken longer, and then I would also, like, that's a whole other thing. It was a nice idea at the time. However, I'm not really sure if it is a practical idea. I just wanted to go back to the old Becca. I wanted to be back to being myself, whatever that was. I didn't know if there was any going back. It was confirmed to me after what happens in this episode that there was never going back, just going forward. I had decided that my New Year's resolution after I had the accident was, if I had my frame off by August or October, that by the end of the year I really wanted to get up a Monroe. However, I was realistic that the amount of damage that I had done to myself and the amount of physio that I might need, that this might not be possible. But it was always a goal. And even now, with my leg amputated, my main goal is to get up a Monroe. And I was getting quite into hill walking before I had my accident. But I never done a Monroe with two legs, so to do it with one would be fucking class. However, in the longer term, I was really looking forward to just being able to lie on my side, being able to go for a shower, wearing pyjama bottoms or trousers instead of having to just wear skirts and nighties. I just wanted to go back to feeling normal. They came and they took me down to the theatre, and if I'm being honest, I don't really remember a lot of the before and after when I had the surgery to take the frame off. I remember being back in my bedroom, and I had like a brace on my leg to hold my knee flat, and I remember like lying in bed and being able to lift up my leg and just feeling like that relief because the weight of the frame wasn't on it anymore. I do remember that one of the staff came in and handed me a little like leather folder, and I was kind of like, what is this? It was around about 6 o'clock, so I knew I had missed dinner time, but when I opened it, it was like this menu, and they were just like, oh, pick whatever you want, and like the kitchen will make it for you. And I was like, oh, I was expecting like some toast or something. And I had something like pretty basic and plain because after having surgery, I know myself, I'm not a very hungry person, but I remember the next day as well, like the lunch was like, they had like toasties and paninis and loads of different stuff. Like there was quite a lot of choice that I was like, that would be great if you could do that in the NHS, but it's just not possible. I really thought initially that I wasn't going to get home the next day because, like I have mentioned quite a few times before, having steps outside my house meant that one of the requirements was that I was able to get up and down stairs. And the physio came in and I was in quite a bit of pain and I was really, really struggling to get up and down the stairs. I went into my room, I had a good cry, I had a few hours to kind of compose myself. In this time, and also kind of after I had had the surgery, I was actually able to get up on my crutches and go into the bathroom and sit down on the toilet without having any kind of commode seat or razor over it. And it was so wild to me that I was finally able to do that after 7 months. Like, it honestly is such the small things in life that you really appreciate when they've been taken away. Like being able to sit on the toilet. Who would ever think that I would be saying, I am really grateful that I was able to sit on a toilet. Anyway, distracted. I had a few hours to kind of compose myself, and the physios came back, and I then managed to get up the stairs. So I was able to phone myself a little taxi, get discharged, get home, and that was like the quickest hospital admission that I'd had so far. So I really felt like I was winning. However, the next 2 weeks were horrible. I was in total denial about what was happening. I just thought that, well, the frame has come off and my leg is just healing that, and all of the pins that were going into it, my body's just healing. That's what's going on here. I was lying in bed with my heart rate about 140 beats per minute. I was having to get changed because I was sweating through my nighties, like they were soaking. And I still only had carers coming in at 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock. So when I would get up in the morning to go pee, I would be sitting in the commode. I'd be sitting in the commode, I bloody hope not. I would be sitting on the commode, crying in pain and not wanting to stand back up to get back into bed because it was that bad. It kind of got to the point where for 2 weeks I decided that I wouldn't eat until 5 o'clock because that was a better option than me being in so much pain. Which that really didn't help mental health wise or physical wise. Like I didn't have the energy to get through the day, and all I wanted to do was sleep. And I just kept thinking, like, this is when it's meant to start getting better. Why do I still feel so horrible, and why am I still in so much pain? However, like I said, I just kept telling myself that this was my body healing. The sad reality of what was actually happening was revealed near the end of July 2020. My dad and stepmom, my brother and his girlfriend had come over and we were going to have a barbecue, and I had just got up to start getting washed and getting ready for the day, and when I got back into bed, I loosened the brace that was to hold my leg straight, and when I did that, a lot of pus started pouring out of one of the pin sites that was at my knee. And when I say a lot of it, like, it wasn't stopping. And initially I thought, okay, I'll phone the district nurses, they'll know what to do. This isn't this bad, it's fine, the district nurses can sort it. And I phoned them and they didn't answer, and my dad had said, okay, I think I'm going to need to phone an ambulance. And I just went into a full-blown panic attack because I didn't want to go back into hospital. I didn't want an ambulance to be called. I didn't want this to be happening. And the smell that was coming from the pus was horrible. And I think the control people of the ambulance had asked if we could get a tub and take a sample of it as it was coming out my leg. Or I don't know if that was us trying to accommodate for just the amount of liquid that was coming out of my leg. The ambulance arrived and they came in, and I couldn't put the brace back over my leg because of how dirty it was, and I had to kind of transfer onto this wee chair because I knew that after that I couldn't stand up and walk. It was so stressful, and getting back, in the back of the ambulance, I remember speaking to the woman, and I can't even remember what her name was or what she looked like, but she remembered me because she'd said that when I had my accident, she was actually one of the paramedics that responded to it, and she had said, most of the time they don't really see people after something happens, so it was nice for her to see that I was okay, although they were having to take me to hospital, which I had thought was really lovely. The ambulance took me to my local hospital, and I was taken into A&E and I had bloods taken, and they had told me that it was probably best that I fast because they thought that I might need surgery done. So there was a few hours of waiting whilst they found out blood results and kind of decided what they were going to do, and I was then sent up to the ward, which I had just been discharged from 4 months previously. And there were some staff members working that recognised me, and initially I thought that they were so happy to see me, but I already knew. I knew that there was something wrong. I knew that it wasn't a good occasion that I was back, even if I didn't have the frame on. Something was wrong. The next day I was transferred to the hospital that my surgeon works in, and still fasting, as they kept telling me that he might want to operate. I think I was fasted for over 26 hours before a member of staff finally told me that my surgeon wasn't actually working that weekend, so I wouldn't be getting surgery, so I could finally have a sandwich, which, yay, that's the exact thing you want after you've not eaten in 26 hours. I was started on antibiotics as they suspected that I had a bone infection, and I was hooked up on an IV drip for 9 to 10 hours a day, probably for at least 4 weeks, if not more. Me and my dad had a conversation with my surgeon where there were 3 options which were pretty hard to hear. Option 1 was I keep my leg as it is and do absolutely nothing about it, meaning that it would be shorter than my left leg. Every 3 to 6 months, I would have to be admitted to hospital and put on IV antibiotics to fight the infection that would just continually keep coming back. I knew at that point that was not an option. That was not how I wanted to live my life. And it was very much what my surgeon has said as well, that I was a very young person and that is not the kind of life that you want to be living, just waiting for the next hospital admission or waiting for something to go wrong. Option 2 was to get another frame that would be further up my leg, which I didn't think was possible initially. And I would have to have my leg rebroken for me to grow bone over where my knee joint is, so that my right leg would be fused and never bend again. We had a discussion about a knee replacement and if this was a possibility. However, my surgeon very honestly told me for a knee replacement, there is one part of your bone that is really needed, and he thought that it was probably going to be infected because when I had my accident, he held that piece of bone in his hand. Speechless. Like, he was right, that piece of bone when they went in was infected. When we discussed the possibility of the frame and the fused knee, I was told that the frame would probably have to be on my leg for 2 years, and I really didn't know how I was going to cope with it. I was only 7 months in my first frame and I really, really struggled, and I didn't understand how I could do this for another 2 years. I went for my 6th surgery in 8 months and they found out that my bone was severely infected, which resulted in my surgeon having to cut away 16 centimetres of my bone, and part of that 16 centimetres was the piece of bone that he had said that he had held in his hand that was needed for me to get a knee replacement. I was then left with the option of go back into the frame potentially for a year or amputate. That was option 3. At this point, I was very much considering getting my leg amputated in August 2020. However, I just knew that the way that my brain works, that I had to try the frame, that I couldn't get my leg amputated and torture myself with the what ifs. What if I had got that frame and everything had worked out and I didn't need to do that and I could have went back to leading some kind of different life to what I have now. I couldn't deal with that what if. But when this option was presented to me, I was about 80% certain that I wanted my leg amputated. And I had conversations with my family where they were supportive and told me that it was my body and the choice that I was making was what was best for me. I could tell at that point they really didn't want me to do it. And I knew my surgeon didn't want me to do it either, because I remember telling him that during one of the conversations where I was trying to make my mind up that I really wish that he had amputated my leg when I had the accident, because at least I would have adjusted in some way. At least I would have my life back. And I could see in his face that I think it kind of took him back a wee bit. I decided that I was going to get the frame, because at the point I was at, amputation felt very much like giving up. It felt like the easy option. I knew that wasn't true. I knew that there was nothing easy about sitting in a hotel room, sitting in a hospital room and having to think about the possibility of chopping off one of your legs. That is not an easy decision. However, at that moment, it really felt like I was giving up. I really just felt like I had to keep fighting. I had to come out in one piece, even if that meant that my right leg was never going to bend again. I really didn't think that 8 months after my accident, I would be exactly back at where I started. something that I feel quite bad about, but it was a reflection of where my mental health was at the point. I remember, I think it was actually as I was getting into the hospital before I had even been told that amputation was an option. I remember telling the guy I was seeing that if I lost my leg, I would end it. That would be it. I would be totally done. And that really shows where I was at, how much it felt like giving up, because giving up my leg really meant that I was prepared to give up my life at that point. Because of COVID restrictions, I was only allowed one visitor, which was my dad. But when he came in, he had to wear a face mask and sit 2 meters away from me. And all I wanted at that moment was a hug. I just wanted him to hug me and tell me that it was going to be okay. To keep him and myself safe, we couldn't do that. While I weighed up my options of frame or amputation, I had something else to contend with, because when it rains, it doesn't just rain, it fucking pours, man. A few months previous to this, my ex had received a letter from Digby Brown about our accident, my accident, the accident, and I really didn't think much of it. I thought this was a case like you get one of those spam insurance calls. Hi, I'm phoning about the minor incident you were involved in. And because I hadn't received anything, I thought, well, that is just odd. Like, why wouldn't they contact me? I was the driver of the car. You were the passenger. Just ignore it. Rookie mistake there from past Becca. Since when I was in the hospital, I found out that that wasn't at all the case. And the people that I had gone into were actually suing me. I was freaking out. I had a citation from court that basically said, respond within this time or you will have to appear in court. And I have it here, so I'm going to go through it, and I'm definitely going to get emotional because every time that I read it, it gets me. It really does get me, but I'm also going to leave out any kind of identifying factors. Form of warrant of citation, 22nd of July 2020. Grants warrant to cite the defender Rebecca Black by serving upon a copy of the writ and warrant on a period of notice of 21 days and ordains her, if she attends, to defend the action or make any claim to lodge a notice of intention to defend with the Sheriff Clerk at blank court blank within said period of a notice after such service. The court has jurisdiction to hear this claim against the defender because the pursuer seeks reparation for loss, injury and damage sustained by him through the fault and negligence of the defender, the harmful event and the consequences which the pursuer suffered said loss, injury and damage. On the 12th of December 2019, on or around 1000 hours, the pursuer was driving a Volkswagen Golf motor vehicle. He was wearing his seatbelt. He was driving his vehicle in the northbound carriageway. The defender was driving a Renault Twingo motor vehicle. She was driving her vehicle in the southbound carriageway. The defender was driving her vehicle in the opposite direction of travel to the pursuer. Without warning, the defender's vehicle moved from the southbound lane into the northbound lane that the pursuer was travelling in. The defender's vehicle encroached into the northbound lane. As a result of the defender's failure to maintain lane discipline, her vehicle collided with the pursuer's correctly proceeding vehicle. The defender failed to drive with due care and attention for the health and safety of other road users such as the pursuer. The defender failed to maintain lane discipline. The defender failed to keep a proper lookout. As a result of the accident, the pursuer sustained injury, loss and harm herein as consequenced upon. I hate that they made it out as if I just did it on purpose. That I was just driving along the road and I decided, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to go into this other lane. I fancy a little bit of chaos today. I would never have chosen to do this. I would never have chosen for this to happen. And I'm pretty sure at the scene of the accident, the police had said that it was due to the roads not being iced properly. They knew that it was black ice. They knew that I hadn't just decided to try to do this on purpose. Anyway, carrying on, because that's not done. As a result of the accident, the pursuer sustained fractured ribs, a right punctured lung, sprained right ankle, soft tissue swelling, bruises across the torso, and exacerbation of pre-existing tremor in both hands, as well as psychological injuries. Following the accident, the pursuer was transported to A&E for assessment and treatment. He had further consultation with his general practitioner, and the pursuer's vehicle was damaged beyond economic repair as a result of the accident. He will incur associated costs as a result. The pursuer has a policy excess on his motor vehicle policy. As a result of the accident, the pursuer has incurred the loss associated with the policy excess on his motor vehicle insurance policy. Following the accident, the pursuer required help and assistance preparing meals, personal hygiene matters, household chores and caring for his wife. Said assistance was provided by the pursuer's daughter and his son. Accordingly, a claim under Section 8 of the Administration of Justice Act 1982. The pursuer has been inconvenienced. He has been inconvenienced in having to liaise with his insurance, attend to medical appointments and liaise with his solicitors. The driver of the car I went into was claiming for £30,000 against me. And as much as I regret the accident and that anybody was hurt in any other way, it was not dangerous driving. It wasn't as if I had taken my eyes off of the road or I was on my phone or I had taken my hands off the steering wheel. It was literally an act of nature and there was nothing that I could do about it. I didn't just decide that I was going to have a wee trot in the other lane for a wee bit. Like, I didn't just decide that my day was causing an accident. I had no idea what I was going to do. I remember freaking out to my dad and saying, how am I going to turn up in court? I literally can't even move out of my bed right now, never mind stand up in a court and have to tell them that I didn't mean for this to happen and that my life is still totally ruined after it. Dad to the rescue again, and he spoke to solicitors and I spoke to the car insurance, who I was no longer covered under because I didn't have a car to insure and I couldn't be driving a car. And I didn't know if months afterwards they were going to take on this claim, which thankfully they did. And I'm pretty sure it was a solicitor from the other side that must have phoned me for some kind of information. He had said something about damages or injuries and I just lost it and I said, I am really sorry. I have not just had this accident and then went on with my life as if nothing has happened. I am actually in hospital at the moment and having to consider having my leg amputated as a result of the injuries from this accident. So I really cannot be answering your questions right now. And he had said, like, I could tell that he was taken aback and he was like, I'm really sorry, I didn't know that. And like, why would you? I had really missed the opportunity to give them any idea of what was going on with me because I had told my ex to ignore that letter. My dad dealt with a lot of the conversations with solicitors and stuff, and I had somebody from the insurance claims side of the insurance company that phoned me and said that they would be making a payout, but it wouldn't be £30,000. And that was the last that I had heard about it. I don't know what the outcome was because they took it over and dealt with it. I was pretty much still on bed rest, hooked up to IV antibiotics, and in this time they gave me a friendly little torture device which helped me to start bending my left leg, which had just been left for the last 8 months. And I was able to get my knee to bend to about 40 degrees on my own, but it was agony. Just for a bit of context, normal degree of movement is as follows. So 65 degrees to walk comfortably, 85 degrees to climb stairs, 95 degrees to sit and stand comfortably, 105 degrees to tie your shoelaces, and 115 degrees or greater to sit cross-legged or do squatting. My friendly torture device is a machine that helped to push my knee up. So that really helped to push past that 40 degree barrier. And I think the barrier that I kind of had was when I was using the machine and it was pushing past, every time my knee would crack. And I think at that cracking point, that was the point where I just could not push my leg any further. I couldn't put myself in that pain for just a second to get it past that point. But the machine was able to do that. And within a day of using it, I got my leg from bending 40 degrees to bending 70 degrees. And I continued to use it up until I left the hospital, and I think by the time I finished using it, I was at about 95 degrees with the machine. However, sitting over the edge of the bed and trying to bend my knee up when I was lying down, I was still only being able to get 40 degrees. I still wasn't able to push myself past that point without having the machine. On the 28th of August, I was united with my second ilizarov frame. After conversations with my surgeon, they thought that the healing process would take 12 to 18 months, which was better than the 2 years that they initially gave me. And although I was kind of really swaying towards amputation, it was better than putting myself through the torture of wondering what if. I was really, really struggling for a good few hours after I had the operation. I couldn't even look at my leg. I couldn't take the covers off to see the frame because I just knew at that point that it was accepting that my life was never going back to what it was before. It was accepting that everything was still on hold for the next 12 to 18 months. And my head was in such a dark place, and it just had me thinking that I was a burden and that people wouldn't want to be around me and they wouldn't want to be there for me, and the people that were there for me were purely doing it out of sympathy, which everybody again showed me that that wasn't true, that that wasn't the case, and I had absolutely no evidence to believe it. I was told that I would probably be a patient for life due to the issues that having a fused knee can cause. They thought that it was probably going to throw my hips off and I might need a hip replacement and I would have issues with my back. That solidified a fear that I had had for the few weeks that I had been in hospital waiting for this surgery. When I graduated uni, I decided that I wanted to work in Scotland for a few years and get my experience up, and then I wanted to immigrate to New Zealand. and I love New Zealand. It is such a beautiful place, and it reminds me so much of home, but just a little bit nicer. And they pay their nurses well, and the quality of life is meant to be better. And even if I went for a few years and came back, I would probably have enough money to be able to buy myself a house. Life had other ideas, and with the complications that a fused knee could have and the rarity of this happening, I really thought that it wasn't a good idea to go to New Zealand, to go halfway around the world where a doctor might not even know what to do. And the reason I say that is because when we discussed a fused knee, my surgeon had told me that I was going to be one of the first people that he had actually performed this surgery on, and that his mentor had done it on 2 or 3 people over the space of like 40 years, I think it was. So this was a rarity. I also found out not too long ago from somebody that had got in contact with me about their mum who had the same frame as me. My surgeon has only put 3 frames that are that size on people in his career. There were a lot of tears coming to the reality of my life, that I had spent the last few years really working my arse off to try and build, and so much shit that I had put myself through turned completely upside down. But I wasn't going to let this ruin my life, and I was not going to give up. When talking to a very good friend, she kind of put it in perspective for me, and she does that with quite a lot of things. The message she had sent to me was, you're not going to be one of those people who are like, this shitty thing happened to me, woe is me, I'll use pity to get through life from now on. You are this fucked up thing happened to me, but I'm here anyway, and I'm still going to change the world for better kind of woman. And you are never going to have normal when you have that attitude. You are going to have exceptional. It just makes me think about my life in such a different way, and my personality, and how determined I am. And at that point, that was something that I really needed to hear. And she has given me a lot of things that I really needed to hear, and we have actually discussed that I'm going to have her on as a guest at some point, but that's for later in the future. It doesn't just stop there with the citation and the amputation thoughts. No, a few days later, I started to panic that I had caught COVID, because I was getting sweats and chills, I was having palpitations, and I really didn't know what was going on. I was getting swabbed, getting COVID tests taken, negative. My observations were looking fine. I was getting poked and prodded by doctors, taking blood samples, and I had a PICC line in, which, for those of you that don't know what a PICC line is, it is basically a tube that is about the thickness of a piece of spaghetti, and it goes into your arm and into one of the main veins of your heart, and it just makes it easier to give medication like the antibiotics I was on, or take blood, because having cannulas in and out of my hands and my feet and my arms, my veins were really starting to collapse, and they had to have a better way of getting the medication into me. However, because I was getting antibiotics at the time of all of this happening, they couldn't use the line to take blood out, so I was just getting stabbed all the time with doctors trying to find a good vein for them to use. So they were really confused about what was going on initially. I was taken for an x-ray of my chest, and I think one doctor told me that I had a chest infection, and then another doctor told me that it was okay, it was just a little blood infection, which a little blood infection, that sounds like sepsis to me. And after getting my medical notes, I read it that it was some type of bacteria in the PICC line that, if untreated, could cause death. So it was very downplayed for something that I found out to be pretty serious for them to tell me, oh, it's okay, it's just a little blood infection. So here was I, now given more antibiotics for a blood infection I had caught in hospital whilst getting antibiotics to treat another infection. How ironic. I soon made an escape from the hospital, and I call it an escape because I was waiting for transport and they had a bit of a mix-up with the chemist, and they basically said, you're not going to get your medication to get home whilst transport's running, so it's not going to happen. And I kind of roped in the guy I was seeing, who at this point kind of became my boyfriend. So he was kind of roped in, and I was like, okay, we are going to try you taking me home if you don't mind. And he came up to the hospital, and with it being peak COVID, the bouncers of the hospital were like, sorry pal, no the night, you're no getting in. And he was like, I am literally here to pick up my girlfriend, she's being discharged. And they were like, nah, sorry, no entry. Even with the ward staff phoning down and saying, look, this patient is going home, can you just let him in to come up to the ward and get her? Nah, wouldn't let him. So that then took resources away from the ward, because I had to have staff take me down to take me outside to the car. But it was a good thing that they did, because I definitely needed some help getting myself packed into the back seat. And after I was in the car, I phoned my brother and I had said, okay, I have made an escape. I am on my way home. However, I think I'm going to need some assistance when I get to the house, because I'm not going to be able to get out of this car on my own. And he said, okay, that's fine. I'll help you if you tell Dad. So that was a bit of sibling guilt for me there. And I knew I had to tell my dad. So I texted him, and it was along the lines of, hi, I'm on my way home in the back of my boyfriend's car. Who at this point, my dad didn't even know I had a boyfriend, so that would probably have been a shock. I don't even know if I said my boyfriend's car, if I left that until after. But I was in the back of a car, and I would let him know when I was safe. And then he starts phoning me and texting me, telling me to pick up the phone. And I'm sitting in the back of the car just absolutely shitting myself, because I already know that this is an impulsive decision. I held up my end of the bargain. I had told my dad, therefore Ryan had to help me get out of the car. And I decided that I would let my dad know that I was home safe when I was in the house. Like I had said, when we got to the house, I had to have my boyfriend pushing me from behind and Ryan pulling me from the front to get me out of the car. I was feeling awful, because my boyfriend had literally just got a new car like that week, and parts of the frame were getting caught on like the seat or the door, and I was like, oh my god, I am so sorry. But it was so understanding, they were both so helpful, and I was just so glad to be home. And I decided that that wasn't something that I was in a rush to do again. Definitely not. To get packed into a car and have to get pulled back out like that was not a fun experience. However, my mental health could not take one more day in that hospital. I had to be back in my own house, in my own surroundings, just chilling and relaxing and not being in a hospital setting. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I think that is probably a good place to leave it for today. much for listening to this week's episode of the Cripple Chronicles. If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment about what you liked about this episode. On all listening platforms, please could you rate and review, preferably 5 stars, but I would just like if you were honest with me. Follow me on all socials at Cripple Chronicles Pod, and if there is anything you would like to tell me or hear about or talk about or just anything, send me an email over at thecripplecechroniclespod@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Bye!